O&S meeting on the 23rd of July 2026. It's now 7 p.m. and I would like to start this meeting. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. There is no planned fire alarms this evening. In the case of an emergency, please evacuate the building using the nearest available exit and congregate at the assembly point outside the college. Item 1. Apologies for absence, Councillor Quirk and Councillor Prince. Is there any other apologies? Item 2, minutes. I move that the committee note the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 12th of February 2026 as no members were present. Are there any comments on these meetings? No? Item 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to make? No. Item 4, the Ofsted CQC Partnership Inspection Send Outcome and Improvement Plan. Can I ask Michelle to present?
Thank you very much, Chair. What I've presented to colleagues this evening is the Ofsted report that we received in December. Now, that seems quite a way back, doesn't it now? But I'm bringing it to committee now to really talk to committee around what we're doing around the implementation. Just to be clear, Ofsted come and inspect the work we're doing around special educational needs and those children that are in alternative provision. It is a partnership inspection, so it's not just about what the local authority are doing, it's about what the school community is doing, what our colleagues in health are doing, what our colleagues in social care are doing. So it's very much seen as a partnership-wide inspection. When we went through the inspection team identified some areas of development for us, and they were really around the timeliness of our education and healthcare plans. So children or young people will put in a request for an education healthcare plan. And what they were saying was there's a statutory duty, colleagues, to do that within 20 weeks. Now, that actually sounds quite a long time, doesn't it? But when you're actually looking at bringing together a lot of reports from a lot of different professionals, actually that time can be sort of eaten up quite quickly. I think the other thing to remember is that actually there's been a significant increase in requests. This isn't a Thurrock issue. I'm sure if you'll have picked up things, across the news, this is actually, a much wider issue than just Thurrock. Oh, so. It's fine. I'll pause. Okay, thank you. So it picked up issues around our timeliness. What it actually said was we weren't working within those statutory timeframes for both educational healthcare plans and annual reviews. So when we issue a plan, there is a view to have an annual review on a yearly basis. What I would say to committee members is we are now looking at over 3,000 plans in Thurrock. So the likelihood of actually being able to take an annual review or undertake an annual review on a yearly basis is extremely challenging. So what we do in Thurrock is we look at key transition points. So that bit from going nursery into primary and primary into secondary and secondary into post-16. So I think that was one of the areas that they needed us to do some more development work on. The other area was around data, and I think that was an interesting one actually, because I think that was data from across a range of partners. So that wasn't just about what the local authority actually collates, and actually there's an awful lot of work going on with our colleagues in the ICB to develop a new data scorecard so that we can really drill down into the data. I would say we've got some very rich data in Thurrock. However, what they didn't see, or what they wanted to see more of going forward, is that joint work around sort of how we're pulling that data together and how we're using it for things like commissioning services. So, you know, if you're saying you're going to commission a number of sessions for, say, a speech and language professional, how's your data driving you into those decision-making processes? And the other area that they pulled out, and I'll hand over to Claire now, was in relation to the work around the ICB. Claire?
Thank you. So they highlighted that there's more work to do in terms of our antenatal contacts. What we've got is an outstanding service that's commissioned by Public Health, but there were some data gaps and contacts that didn't make sense. And part of that use of data intelligence that Michelle talked about is how we're interrogating our data. How are we understanding what the implications of those changing contacts with families is having, both on the families themselves or services. Separately, we know that timeliness with initial health assessments is not where it needs to be. There is a great deal of work happening in that space, but much more needs to be done in terms of expanding the workforce so that we've got enough people in place to undertake those assessments, but that we're, as Michelle said, using a scorecard so that we're really aware about what the performance is for Thurrock children and we understand where those specific delays are. Separately, with regard to our CAM service, actually inspectors got to know a lot about the breadth and depth of mental health support that's available for children in Thurrock, but they did identify that there were children whose mental health needs were not being met. Typically, these are children that are likely or confirmed to be neurodivergent. We know that our CAM service is not fit for all children, although it provides a very good service. We need to understand and then commission something different for other children and young people, and that's work that's already planned and underway. And we couldn't ignore the long waits for neurodevelopmental assessments. So you will be aware, I'm sure, of long waiting times nationally and locally for children that are being assessed for autism or ADHD. It's a problem that has been difficult. There's no easy fix with regard to neurodevelopmental assessments. It's a very complex problem, a wicked problem of trying to expand our workforce, trying to make sure that we have enough people in place to see these children in time. But more critically, while these children are waiting, what support is put in place to understand their needs and then meet their needs regardless of what diagnostic outcome might be met. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like the opportunity to talk to a committee around some of the strengths. I've identified the areas for development, but I think it's important that we look at the strengths. And I think for us, it was lovely that inspectors recognised that children and young people's views and aspirations are central to some of the areas of work that we're doing. I think they highlighted the work of the Youth Cabinet and the work they were doing, which was really good to hear. And also around how we co-produce resources, how we look at, you know, transition materials. We've got a local offer. All local authorities have to have something called a local offer. And on that, we've got some fantastic resources around transitions, around videos of young people, how they've transitioned from primary to secondary. Because actually, that's a big change for children that haven't got special educational needs. So we've done some really nice work around videos and looking at how we can promote and support young people as they make those transitions going forward. They identified some real strengths in our alternative provision. So we've got really strong alternative provision providers, which I think they identified as well. So I think there were some real positives in the report. I think for me, the key thing that came out was our partnerships. We work really well in partnership with our colleagues from health and our wider partners. And I think that sort of really came through on the report, actually, and how we work in partnership to ensure that at all times we are placing the child and the young person at the centre of what we're trying to achieve. And, you know, everything else wraps around that child. So, you know, I would like to talk about some of the strengths as well as the areas that, you know, we need to develop sort of going forward. I've also included the implementation plan. So as part of our work, we need to develop, and we've developed an implementation plan about how we're going to address the areas that we need to do to develop. So that's in there for you to have a look at as well. And I think it's important that we've got that because that enables our local area partnerships. So where the governance sits on this is it goes to something called our local area partnership, which is a partnership made up of a range of partners that are all looking to support children and young people with additional needs. So it goes to there and they hold us to account around ensuring that we are moving forward on the implementation plan that we've needed to develop. So I've given you that in this report as well. I think I'll pause there, Chair, because there may be at this point some questions.
Yes. Does any of the councillors have any questions at all? Yes, councillor?
I was curious if we know the number of backlog for EHCP applications, how many we're waiting to see.
Sorry, Councillor, I don't have the figures on me. So we have approximately 70 requests per month, and that's on average. So some months are quieter, some months are busier. At the moment, I could probably look it up now. We do have live data that would tell us how many. So there isn't a waiting list as such, but what it is the number of plans that are late, so they've not been finalised on time. And the last year that it was counted and published was 2025, the whole of the year from January to December 2025, and that was at 49%. Were finished on time, so not good enough.
Thank you very much, very helpful.
You're welcome.
Can you please explain to everybody how the system actually works from start to finish? Because a lot of people here probably don't know. So who, first of all, recognises that a child has got a problem? And then once, is it the parent? Is it the school? And then once it is recognised, then what's the next step? Then what's the next step? I think people would like probably to know that. Thank you.
Okay, I can talk you through that. So the special education needs can be picked up by anybody. So health colleagues can write to us and say they think a child's got, they've had a child in clinic.
Hang on.
They've had a child in clinic, or they've seen a child presented at a health appointment. So they can write to the local authority to let us know. The school or nursery can also request an EHCP. And the parent or the young person themselves can request an assessment for an EHCP. So what happens is they just need to drop an email or a phone call to the local authority to say, we think our child's got special educational needs, we'd like them to be assessed. That starts your 20-week process. And the first thing we do, we'll write to health, social care and education colleagues to say, what information have you got on this young person or child? And we need that back within 6 weeks. When we get all of that information back, we then assess that to say, do we think this child needs an assessment? Do they meet the criteria set out in the SEND Code of Practice? So it's not us that makes the criteria, it's a published criteria set out by the government in the SEND Code of Practice. So a multi-agency panel decides whether we go ahead with an assessment. And then once we do the assessment, we then gather more information from parents, from anybody that holds information about the young person. And so that might be, we ask for speech and language therapy reports if they've got a speech and language therapist, we ask for OT, occupational therapy reports. And then all of that information goes back to a panel to decide, can this child's needs be met within the normal school universal offer, or do they need something higher than that, more individualised, more targeted? And if the answer to that question is a yes, then the assessment goes through to the issuing of a plan. And all of that time can take up to 20 weeks.
I would have thought it must take longer than that.
Legally,
in many cases.
Yeah,
I can
legally we
see
have
why
20
you're talking
yeah,
about the 20
Yeah.
weeks.
Legally, we have 20 weeks. Often, you can't write an EHCP without an educational psychology report, and educational psychologists is a profession that's underrepresented, isn't it? It's across the country, there's a shortage of educational psychologists, so that can hold something up. Sometimes it holds up when the parent is waiting for reports back from health, when they know they've just had a clinic appointment and they want that back, or so there's a lot of reasons why a plan might be late, and it's not for the want of trying to get them on time. There's also the number, it's just the sheer volume as well, that we have a finite number of EHCP coordinators, and I'd say 70 requests a month on average. So you can see we've got 12 coordinators at the moment. We've just had permission to recruit 3 more that will be coming. So 15 coordinators with 3,000 plans and 70 requests a month. So it's a very, very high demand service. 7.5, I think, isn't it? 7.5, not half a person, but half a post.
Councillor Cabb, do you have a question?
Yes, I would just like to say that when my grandchild went through this, it took us about 2 years, and then I paid for the assignment myself. I paid for the expert to have a look at my grandchild so that we could progress further. I mean, I was always down the school asking why, and they said, we've got one man that can see her, and then he retired. And when I paid for it, the irony was that's the same person we saw. And
So-
she was diagnosed as ADHD in the end.
We've never had a plan go from day one of the request to 2 years. We've never had one go that long. It may feel like 2 years because what the school are asked to do before they put in their request is to do some cycles of assess the child, plan for those child's needs, deliver that piece of intervention, and then review it to see how well the child's made progress. And we need probably 2 terms worth of that evidence before we can make a real assessment. So that happens before the request comes in. So it might feel for parents like they're waiting a long time because they've noticed something's going on, but the school know that we need a lot of evidence to be able to make an assessment of that child. So they'll be doing their little bits of intervention with the children to see, will some small targeted work move this child on without the need for a plan. So it might feel like a long time, but we've never had a plan that's gone 2 years from date of request to assess.
Well, I was in close contact with the school. About every month I was down there trying to see what was happening. And they were quite good. I'm not knocking the school. They were quite good. They were doing all they could to help her. But because they didn't have the expertise or the knowledge, there was only so much they could do, obviously. And as I say, there was one doctor qualified.
I think you're talking about paediatrician. Yes, I think we have a shortage of paediatricians in the area, yeah.
Thank you. I do have... I'm sorry. Doctor?
Thank you for the report. Very informative. I note from the summary that they have accurately said you have a clear understanding of your systemic weaknesses, and that has given you a good foundation for future improvements. I picked some of the things you mentioned, like expanding workforces, creating scorecards, identifying exactly where the delays are, and expanding CAMS to more specific services for more specific diagnosis. I just wanted to know, with all the improvement plans that you're delivering, have you identified the highest risk to them being successful, and how would you mitigate against this risk happening? And now with Scrutiny know that you're delivering, not just with data, but actual factual evidence.
Is this specifically around the health work? So I think it's worth noting that the ICB's just recently been through a change programme. So what was reassuring about the inspection in December was we felt assured that our plans were right. The CQC and Ofsted inspectors go to all sorts of areas, see lots of plans, but the fact that they said we needed to accelerate ours, they understood that the plans were, or they felt right It was just the capacity to kind of mobilise them at pace. And as we were going through our restructure, that was difficult to do that because we didn't know who would be in place to facilitate that, but also how long that restructure process would take to complete. So I'm pleased to say that, locally the ICB acknowledged that there needs to be a stronger strategic commissioning response for children and young people. So as an ICB, we've seen our team expand, which means that we're going to have much more expertise in terms of getting to grips with all of our services and developing plans with our providers and our partners to put them in place. When it comes to things around community paediatrics, they're so multi-layered. So Andrea's just talked about, and you will likely know, that the number of paediatricians nationally is depleting. We need to expand our workforce, which is reflected in the SEND reform. There is an acknowledgement that we need to make more use of specialist nurses and allied health professionals. But part of the challenge around that is making sure that there's enough training places, both in further education and beyond. So it's really ambitious stuff. I think people understand what good looks like, and there is good work happening. The issues are being able to invest sufficiently in the workforce, expanding that offer for all children and young people to make sure that we can catch up on some of those timescales. One of the things that's often misunderstood with regard to ICBs is we don't receive any additional funding for children with special educational needs and disabilities. So we are responsible for commissioning core NHS services for all children and young people. What's taken a bit longer is our health providers being able to identify those children who have SEND needs and then prioritising them, particularly when it comes to meeting our statutory timescales. And there's still more work to do there. We've got 2 designated clinical officers that are working with our provider services, so they're much more familiar with their responsibilities for children with SEND, but also can work with their leadership teams to put in processes, mechanisms for tracking their patient experience. So I think some of the things, I'm hoping I'm coming back to your question, but it's so multi-layered. The things we really need to focus on is, do we have enough people in place to support these children? Do we have the right tools to articulate their health needs earlier? So one of the things with ADHD and ASD assessment is after triage, it can take a long time for those children to be seen by the health team. Children change, as you know. So actually the child that was referred can be a very different child once they're seen by that health team. So we need to do some more work to do screening so that we can capture that need and then work with our colleagues across education and care and put that support in place earlier so those needs can be met even before clinical assessment has started. So the ideas are there. We're looking to neighbouring ICBs. We've seen improvements in other areas, but whilst our waiting times for long, we've got a really strong grip of what our issues are. And I believe that we've got good plans in place. It was just allowing time for the ICB to complete the restructure. It's a priority within our population health improvement plan. Children and young people feature really strongly in our commissioning intentions. And this year, we're intending to quickly mobilise that work to make improvements across community paediatrics and other priority services. I hope that's answered your question, but do come back if I haven't.
The metrics Scrutiny will see that will help us measure that the improvements have been delivered.
So one of the other things we need to get better on is we typically in health measure waits. How long does it wait to be seen? We need to be better at measuring how soon do we understand needs, how soon are those needs being met, and are children and young people telling us that they feel happy and safe and that professionals around them understand their needs. If we can get better, voice is already a strong area within the partnership, but within health, if we could capture that voice better so that we could measure that patient experience, then we should be relying on the children and young people to tell us that their needs have been met effectively. I think tackled with that or tagged onto that is the experience for families. What we know is that when children wait a long time to receive help, that affects the whole family, as you've just highlighted in your weekly visits to the school. But it does affect the whole family, and families want support, they want to understand more about where they can ask for help, where they can receive help, and what to do when they think things are going wrong. So we've identified those areas, we've got plans in place, and we're doing some more work with the partnership to make sure that we need to look beyond the numbers, and we need to be measuring experience.
So does that mean we will have successful delivery of the improvement plans?
Gosh, I hope so. It's going to take time. So I think for children, they want to be understood. They want to understand themselves. They want to get help quickly. And as I've said, the inspection highlighted really good practice by the operational team. So that multi-agency working is effective, but it's not effective for all. So if we can, it always helps when you know what good looks like. If you know what it looks like, then you can put in place plans to just expand that. So it's a priority for this year, and I'm happy to come back next year and comment on that progress. But critical was getting the people in place to help us put those plans in place.
Thank you. I do have some questions myself. How are we improving the EHC plan quality and annual review timeline, and how are we communicating this to parents?
So, thank you, Chair. How are we improving the quality? Well, we're doing a lot of training with both our staff and staff from schools, because the interesting thing about this is it's contribution from a range of different people, that when it comes into the local authority, we need to pull it into a plan. So we're doing a lot of professional development to support that. We're also using technologies. So, you know, there are technologies that we can use now, so we can look at putting some of this through and seeing what that comes back with, linking it against the code of practice. I think the other thing for me in relation to this is we've actually introduced, but we're going that next step of a new portal. That should make things an awful lot simpler for people to access. So there'll be an online portal for people to send their information into. So there's not this risk of someone sent something and it hasn't quite got there, or someone's not seen it. We've got the new work that we're doing around the portal. We've got some staff that are dedicated around quality assurance, so really looking at our plans and looking at that quality assurance. I think when you're talking about timeliness, I think that is still a challenge for us. It would be wrong of me to come to committee and say it isn't. What I would say is the organisation have been very supportive of that, so we've managed to identify some further resources to get some more case coordinators, which Andrea spoke about earlier. But again, what I would like to say to committee members is we get a lot of staff who do not stay in these roles very long. So there's quite a lot of staff turnover. And I think that's partly because it's quite a challenging role, because you're managing, parents who are unhappy and, feel very upset. You're waiting for things to come in that don't always come in on the time you'd like for all sorts of reasons. So I think it almost feels at times, and I often go and speak to the staff, that, it's great that we've got new people come in, but actually what we've got to work on, and it's something I'm talking to my managers with, is how we retain. How are we retaining staff in what we know is quite a difficult area? What I would say, colleagues, is again, and there's no excuses here, but again, when I speak to my colleagues across the region, this is true across the region. So it's not just about Thurrock, but I need to consider with my senior management team, what can we do to ensure that we retain the people that we're bringing in? Because it actually takes a fair while to train people. So there's quite a lot of training involved. There's a lot involved in pulling together an EHCP plan. So for me, it's about making sure we've got the appropriate training for all partners. It's about using the technologies wherever we can. It's about making sure that we are QAing things in that timely manner. But also for me, it's about how do we support staff to remain in the role. And I have to say again, we have been very well supported by the organisation. And, they have recognised the challenges that we've got, and we have got some new staff coming. But as we've got new staff coming, I said farewell to one of our staff yesterday.
Thank you. I do have another question. How are we getting health professionals to consistently tribute to annual reviews?
It was like a race to the button there, wasn't it? So I have a senior designated clinical officer who is supported by a deputy. And outside of SEND inspections, of which they've supported 3 in the last 6 months, their work is wholly focused on making sure that our health services are both understand their responsibilities and are contributing effectively. So one of the key pieces of work that they've done in the last 12 months is develop a quality assurance framework. So again, when I talk about it makes such a difference when we understand what good looks like. So Gemma and her team have been working with health providers to both undertake deep dives into education, health and care plans, kind of demonstrate to staff what a good report looks like, what should be written, what shouldn't be written, what's not helpful. Often it does come up about what's translated into plans, doesn't always make sense. So it's both working with educational colleagues and health colleagues to make sure that that transfer of really rich information about the child is understood and presented helpfully. So that work will continue. Both designated clinical officers meet with health champions across provider services regularly. Now that the SEND inspections are complete for Essex, they'll be able to kind of strengthen that work and move it forward.
Thank you. How are we working Ofsted's expectations on plans to clearly specify provisions and preparations for adult outcomes?
So we've been doing some work with our EP colleagues to really look at this, how we put this specification into a plan. I have to say it's a challenge, because when you start drilling into a plan, if you start thinking about, well, it's 5 minutes for this and 10 minutes for that and 15 minutes for that, that can become quite difficult to manage in its entirety. So what we're looking at is working with our EPs to say, actually, how can you support at an earlier stage around what we can put in the plan that specifies what we're going to do. So that's part of the work we're doing. It's interesting you've picked up sort of preparing for adulthood, because that's one really close to me, actually, you know, thinking about skills development, what do we do? And I think for me, this is about how we're preparing much further back. So we're not waiting until they're at post-16. We're working much further back. So we're working at when they're in year 9, so when they're 14, when they're starting to think about what that's going to look like going forward, and how we do that in a meaningful way that makes a difference for our young people. There is no doubt that, you know, and again, I keep saying national issues, don't I? But there is a national issue now about those young people not in education, employment or training. It's even more acute if you're a young person with special educational needs. There are real challenges around getting into the world of work. We've worked really hard with our colleges around supported internships, which means young people go, they're supported in the workplace to actually access the workplace. And we've had some really successful programmes with very large-scale companies across Thurrock. But there is no doubt we need to be doing some more focused work around that preparing for adulthood. And for me, it is about taking a step back and thinking about that with our colleagues from social care, with our adults colleagues, and with our health colleagues, and of course with education, and how we start sort of preparing that. So I think that's work to do. I think we have got a work stream. Andrew will talk a little bit about our SEND reform plan in your next item, and I think that will pick up some of that work there about what we're going to do around this preparing for adulthood and moving sort of young people through the system. Because what we want them to do is to have a good experience. We want them to get into the world of work where possible. For some that won't be possible, so what do we do about that cohort? But for those that can, we need to look at ways in which we can really address that and offer that support.
Thank you. I do have one more question, and then we can move on to the next item. Who handles neurodevelopment assessments, and why is there a long wait time for these?
So this issue has been growing probably over the last 8 to 10 years. What we started to see was that through the rise of social media and better awareness about spotting difference, there was across the board kind of substantial growth in the number of referrals for assessment. Because it was taking so long to catch up from a commissioning point of view, it then means we've incurred this kind of backlog. So the growth in the workforce has not mirrored the growth in demand. So whereas 8 years ago you may have received 25 referrals a week, you're now receiving 100. And all those children need to be triaged, and then they need to wait. Some of our pathways, what accompanies that is a shift from traditional clinical assessment pathways, which are paediatrician-led. So normally community paediatrics is kind of the central kind of centre where children where there's any developmental concerns will be referred. What we know is that a number of those different pathways that are provided from those centres are clinically led by a paediatrician who has responsibilities for a broad range of vulnerable children. So that means that there are children who are waiting to be assessed and supported with their neurodisability, alongside that growth in children that are waiting to be assessed for neurodevelopmental conditions, alongside responsibilities for making sure our children who are looked after are assessed on time with regard to their health needs. So in short, it's community paediatricians. What we've seen is the more modern pathways include advanced nurse specialists, or occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. You may have neurodevelopmental specialists. You may also have clinical psychologists. So the shift that we need to make, one of the shifts we need to make is making more people get involved in that pathway so that it's not just solely relying on a community paediatrician.
Thank you. I'll move on to item 5 now. Schools white paper send. Can Andrea present this?
Thank you, Chair. So there's a number of big events, and a number of big changes coming down the line for education. 2 of them are what we're talking about here. It starts with the schools white paper that got Royal Assent in April. And that looks at, so that's Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill. And it's a programme of change between education and children's services with implications for schools, local authorities and families. So alongside safeguarding and children's social care reforms that you'll hear about at your next overview in Scrutiny, it introduces measures intended to strengthen consistency across local authority influence in areas such as attendance, admissions and school place planning. So it strengthens the council's responsibilities around electively home educated children and around school attendance. It also looks at our influence around school place planning and schools needing permission to be able to reduce the number of children that they accept. We also have the SEND and AP reforms, so AP again meaning alternative provision. And you've heard this evening about the pressures nationally to the SEND system and the government's reaction to those pressures, to those national pressures, and their pressures around specialist placements, around schools not being able to, mainstream schools not being able to meet the needs of children that have got high needs. There's pressures around budgets, that most local authorities have got an overspent SEND budget. So we get a dedicated schools grant budget. A part of that is a high needs block, which is a dedicated grant ring fence for SEND, and lots of local authorities can't manage to deliver their statutory duties within that budget envelope. So the response to this is to try to develop a more inclusive model of education so that more children's needs can be met in mainstream school. That there is that those schools are more inclusive because they have experts at hand available to give them advice on how to meet children's needs. That all schools have a universal offer of education and what every child can expect in every school across the country, so that there shouldn't be a lottery that you go to a good school for SEN or you don't go to a good school for SEN. And there's other reforms around education, health and care plans. You'll probably have heard in the press that they are changing, and that once schools are strengthened around inclusion, there won't be a need for so many children to have an education, health and care plan because their needs can be met without one. So that's the basis of the reforms. And then what the government asked all local authorities to do was by the 19th of June to submit a plan to the Department for Education about how we were going to deliver the first 3 years of a 10-year programme of change. So we submitted our plan in June on time, and we will get feedback from that by the end of the summer. They say the end of the summer, autumn, so it could be December. We're often, there's often delays, especially when they've got a plan for every local authority. That's over 150 local authorities in the country, so they've got 150 plans to be read and moderated and passed. And if we manage to get our plan passed and agreed by the minister, we will get 90% of our overspend on our dedicated schools grant high needs block paid off. So it's a very important plan that we want the government to agree that we're doing a good job, that we've got good, strong plans in place, and that they will then write off the overspend of our dedicated schools grant.
Thank you. Councillors, is there any questions at all? No? I do have some questions. So what planning and partnership arrangements do we have to support expert at hand and schools to help with assessments?
For each of the 7 areas in the plan, there's a work stream. So there's a work stream around experts at hand, and that's a multi-agency work stream. So we will have, they've all just been newly set up because the plan obviously is only starting from now. So the first work streams are set up for August and September. That multi-agency work stream includes colleagues from the ICB and includes colleagues from schools, settings, parents, young people, and obviously council staff. And we will develop an experts at hand service built around what we already do, a really strong offer that we already have around outreach. So you'll see in our Ofsted report that Michelle talked about earlier, they commended our outreach programme and the work that it's doing. So we're going to build on that and increase that outreach service, as well as increasing the number of speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, EPs. And we have a budget for that, dedicated budget for that comes from central government to be enabled to us to strengthen the experts at hand model. They won't carry out assessments for EHCPs, but they will work with schools to strengthen schools' knowledge and understanding and skill set around how to meet the needs of children with SEN. So they won't be working directly with children, although they might do some modelling, but it's really about strengthening the practice in schools and then making the parents aware of how much stronger the practice is, so that parents are more confident that their children's needs can be met.
Thank you. How will experts at hand be facilitated in Thurrock, and will we have enough experts to meet needs? If not, how will we improve this?
That's a very good question. And it's one that's our biggest risk, is not being able to recruit the right amount of staff, because 150 local authorities are all looking for the same people. And we're not training we're not training enough educational psychologists. We haven't got people in we've got lots of therapists that have moved into the private sector. So they'll started their own occupational therapy service, their own speech and language therapy service, because there's such a demand. The government is hoping that they'll come back into working for local authorities. So we've got to make it attractive, but it is a risk. It's a real risk. And what we're talking about is planning for that risk. So the first thing that we'll start with in that work stream is what happens if we don't get the people we need? How are we going to meet needs? So that will be our first discussion really, and planning for that, and looking to see where we can move staff. So for instance, our educational psychologists, if we can't recruit, we do have educational psychologists that do statutory work, and we can get locums to do that statutory work, and then we can move the work that our educational psychologists do. So there is some plan B, but we might need a plan C and D as well.
Thank you. With the ISPs, how will these be digital? Will there be an app for this, for schools and families to update?
Okay, another good question. ISPs won't roll out until 2029, and they will be rolled out nationally, so it won't be something that Thurrock has a say over. It's going to come centrally. So the government will create a new digital system, and I'm pretty sure there will be an app that parents can submit their paperwork to, but we don't know yet. We don't know what that will look like. So it's what they want to get right first is the experts at hand and the strengthening the school's ability to meet need before they roll out the ISPs. So that will be on phase 2 really.
Thank you. How will the implementation of the white paper be affected during LGR?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, I think, let Michelle take that one.
So colleagues, we're preparing for LGR. I mean, we recognise, as you all know, that the government have made the decision to bring Thurrock and Basildon together. There are lots of quite high-level meetings going on between the directors of children's services to start thinking around that. We've also had some meetings now with the director level to start thinking about what that will look like going forward. There is no doubt that that will actually mean a lot of work and thinking and planning, partly because obviously Basildon are very different to Thurrock. You know, in one sense, Thurrock has got a whole academisation within its schools, apart from one, which is voluntary aided. However, Basildon have got some what is called maintained schools by the local authority. So there's a whole range of things that will need to be considered. What I think we need to make sure we're doing, which is what we are doing to give you a bit of reassurance, is Essex have also had to develop a SEND reform plan. We're talking to them all the time about what their plan looks like. I mean, I have to say, when you think about how you're going to reform a large-scale system like SEND, I suspect, and I've spoken to my colleagues at the DFE, many of the plans will have similar things in them. So there'll be similar themes in them. There might be some nuances around how people deliver at local level, but in the main, there will be similar themes. So we will be making sure that we're working closely with our colleagues to make sure that does all come together. But there is no doubt that significant change on another significant change, and not just for SEND actually, an AP, for all the things that are going on across children's services at the moment. But I think we've got the systems and processes in place to enable us to work that through. I don't know if you wanted to comment, Sheila.
Yeah, I think as Michelle is saying, we are working behind the scenes, if you like, with my equivalents in Essex and in Southend, and the combining of Basildon with Thurrock, the services for children's services are actually provided by the Essex County Council. So it's not Basildon District Council that delivers children's services. So our relationship, if you like, is with the County Council for the Basildon area. We've spent a lot of time sort of trying to think through how can we make this as seamless as possible, because it is a really big ask. And one of the things we've done is pulled together the education leads as well, so that when we're coming up with our reform plan, that we're not doing anything wildly different, or if we are doing something wildly different, having that conversation, saying, so what's the need here that means you have to develop something different. So we're bearing in mind, with LGR going ahead, we're bearing in mind that whatever we're developing here, we need to be thinking of if there's a new unitary, you know, the bigger Southwest Essex unitary, and more schools and more children that will be impacted by this, how are we going to make sure that actually we can deliver together and deliver well? Because what we don't want to be doing is, once we're combined, is suddenly finding out we're doing things radically different, unless there's radically different need, which we've not identified to date. So we are working really closely behind the scenes with our colleagues. Obviously, we're all doing our own plans because we still have to do a Thurrock plan, just as Essex County Council have to do an Essex County Council plan. But I think we're all mindful, and we have already got good working relationships between officers across you know, the different councils, that we're quite mindful that we want to do this as well as we can, but recognising that there's quite a lot of hurdles to jump before we get to where we need to in 18 months' time.
Thank you. Just one more question. How will we as Thurrock transition families over to the new SEND systems?
So the transition will be over time. So we have a really good data management system in Thurrock. And what we will be doing, the request is that as schools are strengthened in their offer to children and young people, that at the end of a key stage, or at the end of a phase of their education, from children that are in year 2 now, so anybody above year 2 will have an education, health and care plan up to the age of 25 if they need it. So that's 7 years old. Those that are in year 2 will move into the new system where they will be assessed at the end of their next phase of education. So at the end of year 6, end of their primary education, there'll be a reassessment of needs to see whether, now that that child's in a school that's much more inclusive, do they still need an education, health and care plan, or can they move on to an ISP? So that's how that transition will take place. And it's expected that that will be a long period.
Can I just come in, Chair? I mean, I think you make a really good point. And if you said to me, what is the real risk around this? It's absolutely the cultural shift and the confidence for parents in mainstream education. I think if you said to me, where does that risk lie? It lies because we need to make sure we're communicating with parents. They do feel confident about the system and the place of education that their child or young person's in. And I think that's why government have recognised this is a 10-year plan. This is not something that's going to happen sort of overnight. But it will be really important that we keep that communication with parents going at all times, just making them aware this is what's happening so that you can build confidence. We've got a Thurrock Family Forum, which is a forum made up of, you know, parents with children with disabilities that we work really closely to. But I think for me, it's right to say to committee at this stage, it is around a significant cultural shift for our parents, and it is about building confidence in the system. And I think that's going to take all of us involved in this part of the work to really drive that and to really present that in a way that that confidence is built. And it doesn't happen overnight. It will take time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from councillors at all? Yes?
I've got an unusual question. I understand that there's quite a lot of children being homeschooled. Is that growing? And how do you cope with SEND issues if they're not coming into school?
I mean, there's no doubt we have seen significant increases in parents who have decided, and it's their choice, to electively home educate. We've got a team that monitors that so that, you know, they're doing reviews, making sure that the children are getting, you know, the education, you know, that they need to get at that particular point in time. But you are right. And again, it's interesting because we're seeing quite significant increases in that. I have to say, the numbers of children with special education needs is still relatively low. And in the main, it tends to be that parents are waiting for specialist provision. So they're waiting for some form of specialist provision, whether that be a resource base, an inclusion base, or a special school. But you're absolutely right in saying, and we have seen a significant rise in parents' requests to electively home educate. We get an awful lot, and we've done some work on this recently, and this is around sort of children that have got high levels of anxiety. So they're really anxious. They're really anxious about coming to school, and we're looking at ways in which we can address some of that. But you're not wrong, the numbers have increased. But for the SEND children, it tends to be where we're trying to find specialist provision. And again, just for committee's interest, really, and these figures are going to sound awful, but they're the truth. In some cases, we are consulting with between 15 and 20 schools for a child, and they're coming back saying we can't meet needs. That's what we'd, and you can just imagine that as a parent, can't you? It's awful, isn't it? And you know, and we're consulting, and the schools are coming back, and simply because there is huge demand right across the system. But it's really hard for a parent if you've done that many consultations, and you get to a point, and you know, we talk to parents, and it's about what, you know, what's wrong with my child, and that's not what we want to hear. But it's difficult because, you know, we can do those level of consultations, and the specialist places are just not available, unfortunately. You know, we're looking to address that, so we are going to do some sort of increased places at Treetops, which we know is our special school in Thurrock. You know, I mean, there's not, again, just for your information, really, there's probably not a week goes past where we don't get parents, and the parents are phoning from Europe. They're phoning from all over to say, I've got a child, you know, if I move to Thurrock, will I get a place at Treetops? Well, if I just say to you, we've probably at any given time got in the region of 200 children that are waiting for a place at Treetops. You'll appreciate the scale. Sorry, Chair, but I just think it's helpful for the committee to see the scale of what actually, you know, we're trying to sort of manage going forward. I'll stop there. Yeah, that's the scale, colleagues.
Thank you. For the reasons set out in this report, the committee is recommended to seek assurance that Thurrock's SEND reform plan is realistic, evidence-led and aligned to local need, with clear partner accountability across education, health and care, maintain oversight of delivery risks during transition, particularly statutory compliance, mainstream inclusion, capability, workforce sufficiency, local provision capability, and financial stability. Request regular reporting on manageable outcomes, including educational health care plans, timelines and quality exclusions and attendance tribunal and complaints activity, use of independent and out of area placements, and the experience of children, young people and families. We will move. Does the committee agree with this? Yes. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the work programme. Can Claire please present?
Thank you, Chair. So you will have a copy of the current draft work programme in front of you. So our next meeting is scheduled for October, and we have several substantive items already suggested for it, which includes some quarterly financial reporting and health representation regarding the initial health assessments that actually Claire Angel earlier referred to. So just opening up that to the committee if they've got any further sort of items that they'd like to see, or a potential future meeting as well. I'll feed back to you on that, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any questions on the work programme at all? No questions. We'll move on to item 7, which is the action log. Claire, can you please present that?
Thank you, Chair. So you have the action log open in front of you. So it does include actions from the 25-26 municipal year, which I've discussed with the Chair and Vice Chair, along with the Cabinet member responsible this week. And we've agreed that because these were historic actions from the previous committee, we will close these but monitor if required, and we've reflected the action log to update this. So that will be included within the October papers where those actions have been closed. But if any committee members do have comments on that, please do of course let us know, and I'll refer back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 8. Recommendations tracker. Claire, can you present?
Thank you. Last one from me. So the tracker currently looks particularly blank for you, but it is a document that complements both the minutes and the action log to highlight the scrutiny journey of reports. So it includes a brief summary of discussions and recommendations that the committee puts forward. You'll see it also includes some briefing notes that were circulated to the committee outside of the formal meetings. So that's just included there as part of transparency. So for example, for pages 50 and 51, you'll see that the recent documents that were sent to you regarding the Mossbourne board update and the pupil place planning as well. So they're captured there for your information. The tracker also captures items that sit within the committee's remit that are on the Cabinet Forward Plan. So that's included as sort of strengthening the relationship between the executive and scrutiny function, so the committee can see what Cabinet are considering, and then you'll get a very short briefing note afterwards summarising those Cabinet discussions, and that will also be vice versa. So if anything does go through as pre-decision scrutiny, I will then do a summary of the committee's comments, and that will be provided to Cabinet as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and now I declare this meeting closed at 8:02 p.m.